Imagine this. You're walking into your children's wedding, proud, excited, ready to celebrate their happiness. Two children, a son and a daughter, from different countries, different lives, both studying abroad, and both getting married around the same time. Everything seems perfect, until something feels off. The same venue, the same date, and then I see them, my son and my daughter, standing at the altar, and my heart drops. They don't know it yet, but they are about to marry each other. I'm the only one who knows the truth, and in that moment, I have to make the hardest choice of my life. I have to stop the wedding before it's too late. I've always believed that if a parent does one thing right in life, it's raising children who can stand on their own. When I look back now, that belief feels both comforting and painfully ironic. I have two children, a son and a daughter. They're close in age, sharp-minded, independent, and determined in ways that used to keep me awake at night. Life didn't hand us an easy path, but somehow we made it work. I made it work. And watching them grow into the adults they became was the proudest achievement of my life. They both studied abroad, different countries, different cities, different lives, or so I believed. What I knew was this. They had both been accepted into the same prestigious college years ago. At the time, it felt like fate smiling at us. Two siblings, worlds apart, still sharing an academic journey. They studied different majors, lived in different dorms, ran in different circles. They were independent adults, and I respected that distance. I never questioned it. Then, within months of each other, they both called me with news that made my heart swell. I'm getting married. I remember exactly where I was when my son told me, sitting at my kitchen table holding a cup of coffee I didn't even drink. He sounded confident, steady, happy. He said he'd met someone special during his final year, someone who understood him, someone he wanted to build a future with. Not long after, my daughter called. I'm engaged. Her voice was lighter, softer, the kind of happiness that doesn't need explanation. She talked about love, about partnership, about finally feeling seen. I cried after that call, quietly, the kind of tears parents cry when they realize their children no longer need them the way they once did. Both weddings were planned for the same season. Different venues, they said, different guest lists, different lives moving forward. Or at least, that's what I believed. I didn't question the timing. Love doesn't follow schedules, I told myself. I didn't question how similar their stories sounded. Love often repeats patterns, I thought. I didn't question the details they left out. They were adults. They deserved privacy. I trusted them. On the morning of the wedding I was attending, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. I adjusted my jacket, smoothed my hair, took a breath. This was one of those days parents dream about. A day of beginnings, a day of joy. A day where you watch your child step into a future you helped prepare them for. The venue was beautiful, elegant, filled with light and laughter and the low hum of anticipation. Guests smiled as they passed me. Music floated through the air. Everything felt right. Everything felt earned. I remember thinking, this is what success looks like. Not money, not status, but this. Watching your child build a life. As I walked through the entrance, pride settled in my chest, heavy and warm. I felt grateful for survival, for growth, for the strange, beautiful way life had unfolded despite every obstacle we'd faced. I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile, because in that moment I truly believed I was walking into a celebration. I had no idea that within minutes, everything I thought I knew about my children, my choices, and my past was about to shatter. As I walked into the venue, I smiled, not knowing that joy was about to turn into shock. At first, nothing felt wrong. The music was soft, elegant. Guests moved easily through the hall, laughter rising and falling like a gentle tide. I took my seat, nodding politely to relatives I hadn't seen in years. Everything looked exactly the way a wedding should look. And yet, something tugged at me. It started with a detail so small I almost dismissed it. The date. As I glanced at the printed program resting on my chair, I frowned slightly. The date was the same one my daughter had mentioned weeks ago. I told myself it was coincidence. Weddings cluster around seasons. Summer dates fill fast. There was nothing strange about that. Still, I folded the program carefully instead of leaving it behind, as if my hands already sensed something my mind refused to name. Then came the venue. I looked around more carefully this time. The marble floor, the arched windows, the way the light poured in from the left side of the hall. I had seen this place before. In photos, in excited video calls. My daughter had shown me this exact space when she talked about her wedding plans. I remember laughing back then, saying, "It's beautiful, you chose well." I swallowed hard. Maybe it's just a similar hall, I told myself. Venues copy each other, styles repeat. My thoughts rushed to calm me before fear could settle. But the coincidences didn't stop. The flowers lining the aisle were white lilies and pale roses, the same combination my daughter had obsessed over. The string quartet played a song she once said she'd always imagined walking down the aisle to. Even the color of the chairs, the same muted ivory she loved. My chest tightened, not in panic, but in confusion. This is strange, I thought, but strange doesn't mean impossible. Then I saw the groom. He was standing near the front, his back partially turned, tall, familiar posture, broad shoulders I'd seen before, not in this setting, not like this, but somewhere in memory. He laughed at something the best man whispered, and the sound made my stomach drop. I couldn't place him. That was the worst part. It wasn't recognition, it was something deeper, something instinctive, the kind of feeling you get when you see a stranger who somehow belongs to your past. My hands grew cold. I leaned forward in my seat, trying to see his face clearly. Just then, he turned slightly. Not enough for clarity, just enough to make my heart beat faster. Why does he feel so familiar, I wondered. Before I could follow that thought, a hush spread through the room. The music shifted. The doors at the back of the hall opened, and then I saw the bride. She stood framed by light, holding her bouquet with both hands, elegant, calm, beautiful in the way that makes a room stop breathing. My heart skipped, not because I recognized her, but because something inside me screamed that I should. Her posture, the way she held her shoulders, the slight tilt of her head as she took her first step forward. I had seen that walk before. I had known it for years. My breath caught in my throat. No, I told myself, don't jump to conclusions. The human mind looks for patterns, especially when it's afraid. I reminded myself of that. I forced my hands to unclench. I told myself to sit still, to wait, to let the moment pass. But my eyes wouldn't leave her. With every step she took down the aisle, the unease grew heavier. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Guests smiled around me, unaware that my world was quietly tilting off its axis. I scanned the faces of the guests, searching for reassurance, for someone who looked as confused as I felt. No one did. They were relaxed, joyful, certain, as if this made perfect sense, as if I was the only one who didn't belong in this moment. The bride lifted her gaze just briefly toward the groom, and in that instant the final piece slid into place. The dates, the venue, the details, the familiarity I couldn't explain. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure others could hear it. That's when I realized I wasn't attending 2 weddings. There was only one. The music swelled. The bride reached the front of the aisle, and that's when the world stopped pretending. She turned slightly toward the guests, smiling softly, and the light hit her face fully. No shadows, no angles to hide behind. Just her, clear, undeniable. My daughter. My breath vanished. At the same moment, the groom shifted his stance, straightened his jacket, and finally turned enough for me to see him completely. My son! For a heartbeat, my mind refused to connect the image with the meaning. It was as if my brain shut down to protect me. Two familiar faces, two children I loved, standing side by side. As strangers, as bride and groom. My chest seized, my vision blurred. I gripped the edge of the chair so hard my fingers went numb. This isn't real, I told myself. You're confused. Jet lag, stress, emotion. But reality doesn't care what you tell yourself. They smiled at each other with the kind of nervous excitement only people in love have. Their hands brushed. He whispered something that made her laugh. That laugh I had heard since she was a toddler. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and shout their names. But my body wouldn't move, because the truth hit me all at once, cruel and absolute. They didn't know. They had no idea who they were standing in front of. To them, this wasn't forbidden or wrong. It was beautiful, earned. Years of shared memories at college, late night studying, friendship turning into love. Two souls who found each other without knowing they shared the same blood. My children had been separated so early in life that their pasts never touched. Different countries, different last names, different childhoods. After the divorce, after the chaos, after the decisions I still replay at night, one child went with me, the other with their mother. Borders, custody battles, silence, and time did the rest. I told myself I had done the best I could. I told myself they were safe. I never imagined the universe could be this cruel. My heart pounded so violently I thought I might collapse. Sweat formed at my temples. The officiant began speaking, his voice calm and ceremonial, while my mind screamed, "Stop this! Stop everything!" I scanned the room, hoping for a miracle. Someone else realizing it, someone else standing up, anyone. No one did. To them, this was just a wedding. To me, it was a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. My son looked out at the guests, smiling with pride, searching the crowd. His eyes passed over me, briefly, casually, and moved on. He didn't recognize me. The pain of that realization cut almost as deep as the truth itself. My daughter adjusted her veil, nervous, glowing, unaware that her entire life was about to shatter. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, but I forced them back. This wasn't the time to break. This was the time to act. But how? How do you stand up in the middle of a wedding and say words that can never be taken back? How do you destroy two lives to save them? The officiant asked the guests to rise. My legs trembled as I stood, my heart screaming, now or never. They were minutes away. Minutes from vows that would bind them legally, emotionally, permanently. Minutes from a truth that would become a catastrophe instead of a prevention. I thought of their childhoods, their laughter, the promises I made to protect them. And I understood something terrifying. If I stayed silent, I wouldn't just be a coward. I would be responsible. The room fell quiet as the officiant prepared to begin the vows. My mouth went dry. My hands shook, and in that moment, standing in the middle of a room full of smiling faces, I realized the weight of what only I carried. They were minutes away from saying "I do," and I was the only one who knew the truth. I don't remember deciding to move. 1 second, I was frozen in my seat, trapped inside my own fear. The next, my body stood up on its own. My heart pounded so loud I was sure the entire room could hear it. The officiant had just opened his book. The music softened, preparing to fade into vows. The room leaned forward in anticipation. And that's when I ran. Not walked, not politely raised a hand. I rushed down the aisle. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Chairs scraped. Someone whispered my name, or maybe they didn't. Everything blurred except the two faces at the altar. The music stopped mid-note. "Sir?" the officiant said, startled. "Is there a problem?" Yes, there was a problem so big it was about to destroy 2 lives. "I need you to stop," I said, my voice shaking but loud enough to silence the room. "Please, stop the ceremony." A stunned hush fell over the guests. My daughter stared at me, confused. "Dad, what are you doing?" Her voice nearly broke me. My son stepped forward instinctively, protective. "This is our wedding. You can't just—" "I know, and I'm so sorry, but this cannot continue." Whispers erupted, phones lifted, faces twisted with curiosity, annoyance, disbelief. Someone laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. The officiant closed his book slowly. "Sir, if you have concerns, perhaps this isn't the appropriate—" "It is the only appropriate moment, because if I wait another minute, it will be too late." My daughter's hands trembled. Too late for what? I looked at them, truly looked. 2 adults, confident, in love, completely unaware of the truth that was about to tear everything apart. I had brought them into this world, and now I was about to shatter theirs. My son's tone hardened. "You're embarrassing us. Whatever this is, it can wait." I shook my head. "No, it can't." The crowd buzzed louder now. Some guests stood, others shook their heads in disapproval. A few relatives glared at me with open anger. I didn't care. I couldn't.
"This wedding cannot happen," I said, my voice breaking, "because you are not who you think you are to each other." Confusion flashed across both their faces. My daughter frowned. "What does that even mean?" My mouth went dry. This was it. There was no turning back. "You didn't grow up together," I said slowly, choosing each word like it could cut. "You were raised in different countries, different families, different lives." "Yes," my son snapped. "And that's why you don't recognize each other," I whispered. Silence crashed down harder than any sound. My daughter's breath hitched. "Recognize each other? How?" I felt my knees weaken. I steadied myself. "Because you share the same father," I said. The words fell into the room like shattered glass. For a moment, no one reacted. No gasps, no whispers. Just pure, impossible stillness. My son laughed once, sharp, disbelieving. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking," I said, tears streaming freely now. My daughter shook her head violently. "Stop! This isn't real. This is some kind of sick test." "I wish it were," I said. "I wish more than anything." The officiant stepped back, pale. A woman in the crowd whispered, "Oh my God." My son looked at me, searching my face for any sign of doubt, any crack he could cling to. "Prove it," he said. "Say you're lying." I couldn't. "I separated from your mother years ago," I continued, my voice barely holding together. "Custody, distance, silence. I lost touch. I thought I was protecting you both." My daughter collapsed into a chair, shaking. "No, no, no, no." My son backed away from her as if the floor itself had turned dangerous. "Stop the wedding," someone muttered. The room erupted into chaos, guests arguing, relatives shouting. Someone stormed out, someone else cried. But all I could see were my children, devastated, betrayed, confused. And in that moment, I understood the full cost of the truth. I had stopped the wedding, but now I had to finish what I started. I had to tell them everything, even if it destroyed us. No one knew what to do after the ceremony stopped. The guests were ushered out quietly, confusion buzzing through the halls like static. The flowers were still perfect, the altar still stood, the vows that were supposed to be spoken hung in the air like ghosts. And the four of us, my son, my daughter, the officiant, and me, were led into a small side room meant for preparation and prayer. It felt like a courtroom. My children sat on opposite sides of the room, not looking at each other, not touching, not even breathing in sync anymore. I stood between them, holding the weight of decades in my chest. "This isn't possible," my daughter whispered. "It can't be." I nodded slowly. "I know how it sounds. That's why I didn't want to speak without proof." My son scoffed bitterly. "Proof? You stop our wedding with a story, and now you want us to just believe you?" I reached into my jacket with trembling hands and placed a worn folder on the table. "I never meant for this to happen," I said, "and that's the truth I'll have to live with." I opened the folder. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at in years. Adoption records, custody papers, letters that were never sent, names blacked out, dates circled, addresses from different countries. "You were born first," I said quietly, looking at my son. "A year later, your sister was born." My daughter's breath caught at the word sister. "After your mother and I separated, the courts decided you would be raised apart. Different countries, different families. It was supposed to be temporary." My voice cracked. "But life doesn't stay temporary." They stared at the papers, not touching them, as if the truth itself could burn. "I lost contact," I said. "Records were sealed, names were changed. I was young, broke, scared, and I believed, foolishly, that distance would protect you." My daughter stood abruptly, tears streaming. "Protect us from what? From knowing who we are?" "I thought knowing each other would only bring pain. I thought ignorance was safer." My son slammed his fist against the wall. "So you erased us. You erased us from each other." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. "There's more," I said softly. They both looked at me, dread filling their eyes. When I started to feel something was wrong, before the wedding, I contacted a lawyer and then a medical professional. I slid the final document across the table, a DNA report. It confirmed what my heart already knew, a shared parentage so clear it couldn't be denied. My daughter collapsed into the chair again, sobbing openly now. "This feels like a nightmare," she whispered, "like the universe tricked us." My son wiped his face aggressively. "We loved each other," he said, his voice breaking. "Was that a lie, too?" "No," I said firmly. "That part was real, and that's what makes this so painful." They looked at each other then, really looked, and immediately looked away, horror replacing love. "We didn't choose this," my daughter said. "Fate did." "And you let it happen," my son said, his voice low. "You could have told us years ago." He was right. "I failed you," I said. "There's no excuse that makes this okay. I was afraid of reopening wounds, and instead I created a deeper one." I dropped to my knees. "I take full responsibility for the silence, for the distance, for today." Neither of them moved to comfort me. They couldn't. Grief filled the room. Not loud, not dramatic, just raw and suffocating. Everything they thought they knew about their lives had been ripped away in minutes. The wedding dress now felt like a costume, the tuxedo like a mistake. The future they imagined vanished. Eventually, my daughter spoke again, barely above a whisper. "We need time," my son nodded, "and space." I understood. "We stopped the wedding," I said quietly, "but none of us walked away unchanged." And in that moment, I realized something painful and permanent. Saving them from one mistake didn't save them from the truth. It only made sure they had to live with it.
Time didn't heal everything, but it softened the sharpest edges. In the weeks after the wedding that never happened, our family didn't explode the way I feared. It didn't collapse in screaming or lawsuits or public scandal. Instead, it went quiet, painfully quiet. My son left the country again, returning to the life he had built before everything shattered. My daughter moved into a small apartment near her work, refusing to stay anywhere that reminded her of that day. They stopped speaking to each other completely, not out of anger, but out of necessity. The wound was too raw, the memories too confusing. And me? I stayed where I was, surrounded by silence and regret. At first, they wouldn't answer my calls. Then they would answer, but only briefly. Conversations were careful, guarded, like we were all walking on glass. I learned something important during that time. Stopping a disaster doesn't mean you escape the damage. It just means the damage looks different. Months passed. Therapy entered their lives separately. Different cities, different doctors, different paths to healing. They weren't rebuilding what they had lost. That was impossible. They were rebuilding themselves. Slowly, painfully, they began to understand that what happened wasn't their fault, but that didn't erase the confusion. They questioned everything, their memories, their feelings, their identities. They questioned how love could feel so real and yet be so wrong, how fate could be so cruel, how a parent's silence could shape their entire lives. And every time they struggled, I felt it. Because the truth was simple, even if the situation wasn't. This didn't start at the wedding. It started years earlier, when I chose comfort over courage. I told myself I was protecting them by keeping their origins hidden. I convinced myself that the past was buried, that reopening it would only cause pain. I believed that silence was kindness. I was wrong. Silence isn't protection. It's a gamble. And I lost. As time passed, my children slowly let me back into their lives. Not fully, not easily, but honestly. For the first time, our conversations weren't built on assumptions. They were built on facts, even when those facts hurt. We talked about identity, how knowing where you come from shapes how you see yourself. We talked about trust, how easily it breaks and how slowly it rebuilds. We talked about responsibility, especially mine. I didn't defend myself anymore. I didn't explain my fear. I listened. Because one of the hardest lessons I learned was this: being a parent doesn't mean being forgiven. It means being accountable. There were days my daughter asked questions I didn't have answers to. There were nights my son admitted he still felt guilt, feelings he knew were irrational, but real nonetheless. I learned that trauma doesn't disappear just because logic explains it. And I learned something else, something I wish every parent understood. Children deserve the truth about who they are, not when it's convenient, not when it feels safe, but when it's right. Secrets kept out of love don't stay small. They grow, they wait, and when they surface, as they always do, they cause far more damage than honesty ever would have. Truth delayed is still truth, but it comes with consequences. If I had spoken years earlier, the pain would have been different, smaller, manageable, survivable without shattering lives. Instead, my silence allowed fate to set a trap no one saw coming. Today, my children are healing. Separately, slowly, bravely, they're building futures that no longer intersect the way they once did. They will be okay, but they will never be untouched by what happened, and neither will I. Because every parent wants to protect their children from pain, but real protection doesn't come from hiding the truth. It comes from trusting your children with it. I stopped my children from getting married, but the truth is, I should have stopped the lie years earlier.